let me check with our tech specialist. Do we want the lights on in the front? They're kinda,
No, we should turn those off.
okay, cool. Just the front, yeah. And that way you'll be able to see the slideshow better.
Jeremy, are you recording to our Zoom account? Jeremy?
Talia, I am.
Yeah, I think that's good. That's good, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And you got my note to say, the people to say hello to for me, please?
Sure did.
Peyton's in blue in the back row. Jonathan's sitting in front of her. Okay.
Talia, they can actually all hear you right now. So if you want to just say hello,
okay.
you can.
And Janice and all my friends. I sure wish I were
They're
there.
waving.
If we're good, we're ready to go.
Cool. Clicker is fantastic. People can hear my voice. Excellent. All right. I'll let Dwight start things off.
Is it on? Yes. Good morning to you all. Welcome to the KOH Library. Before I start, I have one announcement to make, maybe two. One announcement that I keep trying to make as often as possible, so you can all put this down in your calendars. Sometime towards the end of October, KOH will be hosting Rabbi David Wolpe, who is extremely well-known and from all I've heard, like one of the wowest speakers you will ever hear. This will be a big production. It'll be in the hall over there. They'll be expecting a large crowd. The second pre-announcement I want to make is, well, I guess I already welcomed you, but I also want to wish you a happy fill up your gas tank day. Nobody understood that. Starting day, wait, what day is it today? Starting the day after tomorrow, gas will go up 65 cents a gallon. You don't know that? Yes. It's going to go up 65 cents a gallon. That's a new. Okay, fine, good. Okay, let's not start a controversy. We are here for a different purpose altogether. It is my pleasure to introduce all of you our guest speaker, Nathan Weisberg, backed up by his wife, Sarah, who, however, may not be participating in a vocal way, but has certainly participated in the production of this talk. Nathan himself is he is a graduate of the, and by graduate I mean graduate school even, the Sacramento State History Department. Before that, he was a history major at Lewis and Clark College up in Oregon, and he currently is teaching in the public school system in the Sacramento area. I'm sure that almost all of you know him as the scion of the famous Weisberg Mosaic Law congregation family. And where is Papa? Online, for sure, yeah. Okay, so this talk in particular is a series of talks. It's one in a series of talks. Can you remind me, is it number 3?
No. Isn't it? Because we've given more before.
No, but in this new series.
Oh, this is it's number 1 in a new series. Okay, but
It's a standalone talk.
oh, okay. I shouldn't venture into that territory where I don't know anything about it. But I mentioned that because I was going to say that many of you probably have heard Nathan present before. He's given several well-received, exciting talks here at Mosaic Law. And many of you probably do not remember his first talk. How many of you do?
It was Holocaust numismatics, coins and money from the Second World War. Yeah.
He doesn't even remember. And stop the debate. You're all wrong. His first talk was given at about the age of 9 in the Mosaic Law Chapel. Okay. And I'm not sure. Do you remember the title, the topic?
I do not.
You do not, but I'm right, right?
Probably. I believe you.
It was extremely memorable, but my brain is rotted out at my advanced stage. Anyway, it is my pleasure to not kill any more of your time and turn it over to Nathan, who will give us a very interesting talk, I'm sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Dwight, for that excellent introduction. Money and the Jew, we went with a provocative title, but we want to ask a provocative question. Obviously, there's anti-Semitic stereotypes about Jews and money. The idea that we're greedy and we're money-grubbing and miserly, or the idea that you sometimes hear that Jews have like some kind of exceptional business sense, and something makes us just better at it. Obviously, these are anti-Semitic canards. The Jews are not noticeably better at business than any one of a number of other groups, and nor are we particularly more miserly or money-grubbing or any of these many negative stereotypes. And yet, there is a relationship between Jews and commerce. Jews were intimately involved in the founding of the modern banking system. Especially the Rothschild family has often been described as the start of modern banking in Europe. We know Jews were closely involved in trade in the early modern and even the pre-modern world. There were Jewish moneylenders throughout Europe. Why does this happen? Why were we so involved in money? Where is that relationship? Where's the truth to the relationship between Jews and money, separate from your anti-Semitic stereotypes? Anyone have any insights? Yeah. Absolutely. That's a big part of it. Jews weren't allowed to own land in many places, and especially in medieval Europe, money lending was one of the few jobs available to us. Yeah. Yes, usury. The church banned usury, charging interest on loans. Christians weren't allowed to do this. Jews weren't subject to canon law, so they could. This definitely plays a role, but we should note Jews were also closely involved in commerce in the Muslim world, where those restrictions did not apply. Muslims absolutely could lend money at interest. And yet we see Jews closely involved in trade and buying and selling things, especially long distance trade, in tax collection, in a lot of the same areas as in Christian Europe, also in the Islamic Middle East. So this is part of the explanation, but not the whole one. Jonathan, then Tamar. Ooh.
Then they would open up the avenues, the channels for doing trade in those areas.
Okay, this was an excellent observation from Jonathan, which no one on Zoom was able to hear. This is quite all right. Just to basically summarize, you're saying it has to do with these really tight communal ties, this Jewish tribalism, and Jews forming these tight communities along trade routes. And you're very much onto something. I want you to remember that idea because it's going to come up again in this talk. Mike. Oh yes, Tamar, and then I'll move on. Yes. Hold on one sec, Tamar. We want people online to be able to hear you.
Okay, I was just saying, like, since there were Jews in like both the Christian and Islamic worlds, like they could go back and forth, and when there's trade between them, and also like along the Silk Road to all the way all the way to China at one point, and then the when you get down to Yemen, you could just take a boat across to India. So yeah.
So you're saying it's geographic. It's where the Jews were in the world that explains our involvement in trade.
Yeah, it's one factor.
I mean, I think that's also definitely a factor. All right, well, let's start. If we could, clicker is good, awesome. So before I dive into our rather long-winded answer to this question, because, you know, as in history, nothing is ever simple or easy, I just wanted to briefly talk about some, what with my middle schoolers I'd call vocab words. One of these is feudalism. I think feudalism is a flawed term, and I think some historians misuse it. But we're going to use it anyway because it's the best term we have. And I'm going to be using feudalism to refer to a kind of economic system that existed in much of the world, especially across Eurasia, really from the invention of agriculture up until the modern period. And this is an economic system we're going to spend a while describing, but it's characterized, among other things, by the existence of classes of big men and little men. You guys may have learned about feudalism in school, and they would have taught you about European feudalism with like kings and lords and knights and serfs. That's one form of feudalism. It can look like that. I'm using a much broader definition. We've got your big men, and they are almost always men. They're a landed aristocracy. They're the people who actually own most of the land, who extract wealth from those little men living under them. And they can be knights and lords. You may have multiple layers of them like you do in medieval Europe. You may just have one layer of big men like you'd find in pre-Roman Gaul, but they always exist. And then underneath them are the little men. And those are could be free peasants, could be serfs, could be tenants in parts of West Africa. They could be overwhelmingly slaves. And they are the vast majority of people, the ones who are actually doing the work and producing things. Also important to this system of feudalism that we're talking about is the existence of these reciprocal social ties. These are horizontal ties, so ties between the big men and other big men, or little men and other little men, and vertical social ties, ties between the big men and the little men underneath them. This also could include between, say, the king, the more powerful big men, and the lesser big men, but we're not really going to get into that aspect of it. Mostly we're focused, the little men, the big men, how they relate to each other and within their groups. Does this make sense? Okay. All right. So the economics of the Eurasian world from the start of the Iron Age, from even before the Iron Age in some places, up until really the Renaissance, and even then for a while after, tend to look very similar. Now, I realize that we're talking about a long span of time and a large area of the world, and there are differences between the economies in these different places, so I am generalizing. But on the whole, these things I'm about to go into are true. Yeah, Tamar? What about North Africa? North Africa is included in here to a degree, especially Egypt. Egypt is absolutely part of this world and this system. So's Morocco. It gets a little tricky in other parts of North Africa just because the environment is so different from these other places. But yes, you can include most of North Africa in this. You can include much of West Africa for a narrower span of time. You can even include parts of East Africa if you want to. Anyway, so the economic system in these places is overwhelmingly agricultural. We're talking over 90% of the population is working in agriculture. Most of them, almost all of them, are little men. The ones who aren't are small artisans producing things that you need to be able to make agriculture work. They're making tools, they're making shoes or clothing. But overwhelmingly, people are producing agriculture. That is the #1 sector of the economy by an order of magnitude. Secondary sectors include textile production. Your farmers who are doing this agriculture, when they're not actively farming, they are sitting at home making textiles. They are spinning fibers into thread. They are weaving thread into cloth. They are turning cloth into clothing. Most people make their own clothing at this point in time. The only other sector of the economy really worth talking about is metalworking. Your blacksmiths making tools that people need, or your miners mining iron ore. Everything else the economy does is vanishingly small. Less than 2% of the total sum of economic activity. Most economic interactions are non-monetary. People are not using currency in these interactions. You'll notice this is this medieval piece of artwork from Spain. Shows these are little men. They are bringing their taxes to a big man. These are peasants paying taxes for the land that they farm but do not own. They are paying their taxes in the form of agricultural goods. Wool from the sheep and grain. And grain is the big one. If you go to China or Japan during this time period, they're going to be using rice. You go to Northern Europe, they're going to be growing wheat. You go to the Middle East, we're talking wheat, barley, spelt, rice. These are the grains. This is mostly what everyone is doing, is growing this grain. There's the class structure that we already talked about. You got your big men and your little men. There may be some differences. You got, in India, you've got a caste system. In Europe, you've got their own variant, that medieval feudalism with knights and lords and things. Again, like I said, we're generalizing. We've got our little men. We've got our big men on top of them. Interactions are not market-based. So when we go out and buy something today in the modern world, almost all our purchases, they're taking place within a market, right? If I go to the store and I am buying potatoes, the price I pay for the potatoes is set by supply and demand. There's a bigger supply of potatoes, price goes down. There's more demand for potatoes, price goes up. And I am buying things from someone whose primary goal, the chain store, Rayleigh's, whatever, their goal is to make the most money possible. And that's not really going to be true for most of the economic interactions that people are getting involved in feudalism. I'll explain what that looks like in just a sec on the next slide. Yes? Where does the church come in? The church is a little less universal, but we do see things like the church. Often, those big men we're talking about are church officials. In fact, in this piece of art right here, that guy right there, he's a priest. In many places, some places, the big men are the notionally, secular nobility, the aristocrats. In some places, they are bishops, they are monks. In places in India and China, it may be a local Buddhist monastery. In the Islamic Middle East, you may have religious institutions who are governing land, although it's a little less organized there than it is in China, India, and Europe. It doesn't really change the paradigm we're talking about. In places where you have the church directly administering land, they're going to be administering that land in much the same way that your non-church big man, your local lord is, and they're going to relate to the peasants in much the same way that the rest of the lords and aristocracy are. In fact, your medieval Christian church in Catholic Europe, your high-ranking bishops and people like that, most of them come from the aristocracy and the nobility. Even if they're technically part of a different class by becoming bishops, before they became bishops, they were born, usually, into noble aristocratic families. But good question. And then the last characteristic of this feudal economics in the Eurasian world that I want to talk about is state intervention. There are exceptions. There's efforts in some places to bring down grain prices, because when grain prices get too high, people start rebelling. But As a general rule, the only kind of government intervention in the economy you're going to see under feudalism is intervention designed to directly make money for the state. We see this a lot in Egypt, where people are required to buy things from the government. The government owns vast farms worked by peasants. These are sold at artificially high prices that people are required to buy at. We see this in France, where there was a tax on salt, and every single French person above a certain age was required to buy a minimum amount of salt every year at these inflated prices due to taxes. And we see something similar in China. Sometimes it's indirect. It's someone bribing the king in order to give them a royal monopoly on the production of a certain good in a certain place. But as a general rule, state intervention in the economy is extremely unwelcome by the common people because its function is to increase prices and to extract wealth from the common people for for usually just the state itself. Yes.
Taxes being collected in forms of grain or something.
Hold on, we're getting you a microphone. Yes. It's okay.
You had mentioned taxes being collected
Mhm.
in forms of grain or something.
Yes.
For the state interventions, are they also collecting, are they collecting actual money or are they collecting goods? And
Yeah.
what do they do with all the goods?
What do they do with all the goods? Well, some of it gets eaten, some of it gets sold. The state is dealing on the level of currency. Your common person, the ordinary people, those little men farmers who make up like 90% of everyone, they're not using money very much. They are occasionally. I'm not saying they never use money at all, but it doesn't play a super major role in the economics of their lives. For the kings, for the monarchs, for the big men, they are using money. Money's main function, the function of like currency, coins at this point in time, is to allow long-distance trade, to make long-distance trade easier. Basically, you've got small pieces, usually of silver, and to a lesser degree gold and also copper, that are stamped by the state. This is what this silver coin weighs. You know exactly how much it is, so that makes trade easier. It also simplifies things like tax collection. So that state intervention, that is going to involve currency to a considerable degree, and a lot of the stuff that this guy is bringing in, this wool, this grain, some of that he's going to keep for his own use, some of it he is going to sell. And let's put a pin in that, because who's he selling it to? Who is actually using the money here? And because obviously the little people aren't, and they're not paying their taxes to the big men, and so while the big men are using some money, a lot of their economic interactions don't, because they're not getting money from the little people who are paying them rents. So we will come back to that. Yes, we also had a question. Oh, fantastic. Yeah, no, good. Because of course money does exist in this system, even if it plays a relatively minor role. But the most important aspect of feudalism in Eurasia for this long time period we're talking about are those reciprocal social ties I mentioned earlier. On the one hand, you've got the vertical ties, and they're reciprocal, which means they run in both directions. Both parties involved in this are helping each other to a degree. The vertical ties are exploitative, of course. The big men are exploiting the little men. They're taking their produce and what they're producing on their farms in the form of rent or taxes. But they're providing something on the other hand. This may be farm equipment. Your average peasant farmer can't afford to maintain a team of oxen because those oxen eat food, even when you're not using them. But having a team of oxen is really helpful if you're farming. They can pull a plow much more effectively than, say, a human being can. Your big man, he's got a team of oxen. He may loan that team of oxen out to different little men in the area. He's also providing the little men with land, which he owns and they don't own. And he's providing military protection, at least in theory. Sometimes the military protection was from other people, but not from me. In return, the little men provide free labor. They provide that rent and taxes, the farm produce they're giving the big men, and also military service. The big man may say, hey, I need to go to war. You remember that help I gave you? I loaned you guys use of my team of oxen and my plow. I'll let you use that during the planting season. You need to pick a man in your family and send him to go serve in my little army that I'm leading off to go and fight. Now, like I said, this system favors the big men, but the little men are not powerless. You have horizontal social ties going on as well. The big men are going to help each other, of course. They've got marriage alliances between families. If, say, there's one big man gets in a fight he can't win, he's going to call on others that he has ties to help him out. But the little men also have really strong ties. They can mobilize a community against a big man who they don't feel is doing his part in the reciprocal aspect. First, to bring social pressure on him by shunning him and excluding him from communal things. And later, if things get extreme enough, in the form of a peasant revolt by rising up. But I really want to talk about the horizontal ties between the little men, between the ordinary people, and how they look in everyday lives. Suppose you're a peasant farmer, and you could be living in China, like these guys, farming rice. You could be living in the Mediterranean area, growing barley. You could be in Germany or France, you're growing wheat. You have a bumper crop one year. You just had a great harvest. You've got enough grain to last yourself and your family for another year. That's the minimum you need. And then you've got a whole bunch of extra grain on top. How can you bank that surplus wealth you've just created with your good harvest? How can you store that wealth so that you can use it again in the future? Any theories? Silos. So you can store grain in silos, and people do. You have to store grain after all because you harvest grain once a year, but you eat all year. The problem is grain can't be stockpiled effectively with the technology you have access to for more than 1 year. You really can store grain for about a year, maybe a year plus a few months. After that, your grain is going to start to spoil, and its value is going to drop pretty quick. So stockpiling grain beyond a year isn't going to help. Yeah. Very good. So you can sell the surplus on the market. There is a market. Currency, as we said, money exists. You can sell your grain for money. And peasants do this, and then you can store the money. But there's a couple of issues with this approach. And while peasants do this to a degree, they don't do it a lot because the time when the peasant has a surplus of grain, right after the harvest, is when grain is at its least valuable and money is at its most. So if you sell your grain then, you're not going to get a very good return. And the time when the peasant needs to spend that money, because you're a peasant, so your number one concern is not starving to death in a bad year, right? If you're selling your grain, you're trying to bank that value. It's so that when there's a famine, when there's a crop failure, you don't starve. When you're selling your grain, grain is less valuable, money is more valuable. During a famine, money is less valuable, grain is more valuable. So while you can do this, and peasants do it, it's not you're only really saving a fraction of that wealth. And it's not super helpful. Also, there aren't really banks for you to store your money in. You're just keeping your money in your house. And that can be dangerous and not super safe. But some do this. There's something else they're going to do instead. Any guesses? Devora, if we can get a microphone to you so the people online can hear.
Thank you. So there has to be some kind of way of preserving at least some of it because, like you said, it won't last for years.
Mm-hmm.
It might even be eaten up by rats and other critters well before that. But they could maybe change some of that grain into hardtack and other kinds of bread, cracker
Mm-hmm.
type of things that will last a long time, like matzah that will last for years.
That's an excellent observation, and you can do this. Specifically, it's not hardtack they're turning their grain into, it's alcohol. Because alcohol keeps a very long time. And so you can turn grain into ale in particular. A lot of people would drink a kind of small ale. This is true in Europe. But there are limits. There are limits to that. You can't actually live off alcohol the way you can live off of grain. So it is reducing the value of it to a degree. There's issues with storing it. There's issues with the equipment needed to actually make this. Your average peasant is not a brewer. So this works, again, to a degree. People can do this. They make small ale.
Alcohol content and has to be made all the time.
Yes.
So we're talking less than 1%. It's just enough to kill the bacteria so that it's safe for people to drink. This is in particularly in Europe. This is the drink, like for everybody, no matter your age.
Can you briefly summarize what you just
Yeah.
said for the people online?
So small ale is less than 1% alcohol. It's just enough to make it safer to drink the water. And that is sometimes made at home in the ancient and medieval period. But it's not, you can't store it. Like you can store hard alcohol for a long time. Small ale will go bad.
Yeah, thank you. All right, let's hear a few more suggestions. Okay.
Is there a futures market?
Is there a futures market? Alas, not really. You'd be surprised. There was some very sophisticated commercial stuff going on in the Middle East, in China, during this time in Japan. Osaka has a futures market from goodness, from the 1200s on, the 1100s on. But that's not available to peasants. Generally, that's not available to them, so it's not really an option.
To a fellow little man who needs it that year on the promise that on a future year, you will get it back.
Exactly. Fantastic. That's our answer. Here's the thing. Your little man, he lives in, or she lives, because, well, the big men are almost always men. The little men are half women. Yes, little women like the book. Your little men, they live in small communities in which people rarely join the community and people very rarely leave. You know the rest of your community. You've known them your entire life. In most cases, your family has known their family for generations. There is an incredibly strong degree of social cohesion, much more than we find in modern society. I have a surplus of grain. I had a really good harvest. Maybe the Joneses down the road had a bad harvest, and they're in danger of potentially starving to death in time for the next harvest. So what am I going to do? I'm going to give them a chunk of my surplus to help them make it until the next harvest. I'm going to banquet my neighbors. I'm going to use this extra grain for dowries for my daughters, to marry them off, to build these strong social connections with the family they've just married into. And I'm going to do this because I'm trying to accumulate social capital. Because the more generous I am, the more the rest of the community owes me favors. This makes sense? And this means, so I'm generous when I have more than enough. And then when I'm desperate, when my crops fail, when I'm in danger, the rest of the community, the ones who have more, they will come and they'll help me out. And this kind of social debt, this kind of social capital, not only will this last, maybe my entire lifetime, but it can be transferable across generations. My son may be able, long after I'm dead, my son or daughter may be able to go to another family and say, do you remember how my dad or my granddad helped you guys out when you were facing starvation? Well, bandits burned our crops. And we're going to starve unless we get help. Will you help us? And more often than not, if the other family can, they will. And these horizontal social ties, this is the defining factor for 90% of everyone in almost all of their economic interactions. even if I'm not just giving things away to people so that they owe me social capital, if I'm going to the Joneses down the road and saying, hey, I want to swap some onions for some eggs, I'm not going in thinking, how do I get the best possible deal for me off of this? How do I convince the Joneses to part with the maximum number of eggs possible for the minimum number of onions? I'm thinking, well, one, how do I get the eggs I want? But two, how do I make sure that this exchange with the Joneses leaves the Joneses feeling good about our deal? Because if they think about me, think I'm trying to take advantage of them, or I'm money grubbing, that's negative social capital. They need to come away happy because I've got to live with the Joneses for the rest of my life, and my kids have to live with their kids, and so I need to keep them happy. Does this make sense? And this, like I say, this dictates almost all of their deals. I'm going to buy shoes from the shoemaker in town. I'm trading with him. I need him to be happy with me. He needs me to be happy with him because, well, we need him to be happy because he's the only shoemaker in town, and he needs us to stay happy with him because we're his customer base. If he annoys us, if he makes us mad enough, if he starts price gouging people, trying to get the most for his shoes, the community as a whole can say, yeah, we're just not going to do business with you anymore. And we can bring, with our horizontal social ties, we can mobilize the entire community of little men against this guy if we don't like what he's doing. And this is very different from how economics work now. Yeah, Julie, wait a sec, you're getting a microphone?
I have something to share from real life. When I was young, I was born in Israel, and when my parents moved to the farm, what you're saying is make me smile because I remember many times my father had in the farm tomatoes and cucumbers and eggplant. We raised those, and also cows and eggs and stuff we have from the chicken. But we didn't have many in the 70s up to this maybe almost 80, 75. Actually they started before I was born. From the 50s and 60s, when they have the farm, they didn't have many places to sell it unless we drove to the city to trade things or sell, like you say. You remind me when you say we gave them products of vegetables. And my father used to buy me shoes for Pesach, for holiday, for Rosh Hashanah. I seen it like right now it's happening. He used to tell him, I give you a box of tomato. I need for my daughter
a pair of shoes.
A pair of shoes or sandal. And I remember that it's similar to what you've been talking about. It was all over Europe and all over Israel too. So I saw it in front of my face, and it's been years. And the starvation that you say in the farm, we used to open the door in the morning. We've seen boxes of food that neighbors have sharing with us and giving us stuff, and we gave them too, and we appreciate that. And we always know that someone there for us to help us and take care of us, and we did the same thing.
And exactly. I'll bet if there was someone in the neighborhood who needed, your dad would go and leave a box of your family's produce on their doorstep as well. Exactly. And you can see elements of this still exist even in some places today, although it's become more rare. Absolutely. All right, I'm going to move on just a sec. Just wanted to point out this image here. This is a piece of artwork from China. We see the Chinese little men in the foreground harvesting. We see the house of the big men in the background. In China, the big man would have been a local landlord who owns the land. The Chinese are renters, and they're going to be paying rent in the form mostly of agricultural products, mostly rice, to that big man. Let's see. All right, there we are. So where do merchants come into this? Because obviously not everyone in this society is a big man or a little man. There are people outside of those categories, and that's who the merchants are. And merchants exist because there are things that you can't acquire through your social ties under feudalism. Certain types of your village may not have a blacksmith. If they do have a blacksmith, it may be a real small timer who can repair some things, but can't really produce a lot of new things. A lot of fancier, larger tools and equipment you may have to buy from cities. Luxury goods, especially if you're a big man, you want your luxury goods to buy with all these rents you're extracting from your little men, you have to deal with merchants. That's not stuff you can source locally. And merchants break this system of social rules that we were talking about. Now, when I go to the store to buy potatoes, I expect the store to be trying to make the maximum profit they can on those potatoes. I'm not offended by the idea that Rayleigh's is trying to charge as high a price as the market will bear on potatoes. This doesn't really bother me because I expect it, and I think you guys feel much the same. But for your medieval peasants, regardless of where in the Eurasian and parts of Africa world they're living in, they're not used to that. To them, dealing with a merchant, which probably is a small peddler who's coming by the village to sell things the village doesn't have, the peddler trying to make the most possible money on the things they're selling the villagers feels like a betrayal of trust because it's not something they're used to. The merchant visits the village and leaves. They don't need a super great relationship with the villagers in the long term. They need to make enough money to support themselves and turn a profit. And to the villagers, it feels like you are ripping us off in some degree. You're not dealing with me the way my neighbors deal with me, where they've got a surplus, so they give it away. Or if they're trading things with me, we're trying to find a deal that makes both of us happy because we have to live with each other for generations. You're just trying to make a deal that gets yourself the most. This feels like a betrayal of trust. So the little men don't like merchants. The big men don't like them either. The big men, the elites, believe that there are essentially two morally correct ways to get rich. One is to inherit your money. The other is to get rich through war and loot. We don't share these values today, but this is where the big men get their money. They get their money through war, and then they leave it to their descendants. And so naturally, they view these as morally correct. And the merchants who make money without producing anything is seen as cheating by both of these groups. This is hard for us to understand because we live in a society that celebrates trade and business. And we see going from one place to another. I buy grain in this town where it's cheap. They've had a great harvest. I take it to a town that's facing famine and I sell it at higher prices. You're helping the town that was facing starvation. If the merchant wasn't there, how would they have gotten their grain? But to the people in the town who are getting the grain, it feels like the merchant is taking advantage of their misfortune. To the people in the town that has abundance, it feels like the merchant is ripping them off by buying low and selling high. And this is seen as inherently bad. The result is that merchants are almost always held in suspicion by the general community. We really don't appreciate now just how much people involved in trade were looked down on by almost everyone else in society during the medieval period. Hold on one sec. We're getting you Dwight's bringing you. Go ahead, Mr. Weisberg.
Thank you. But what this brings to mind, and I want to ask you, do you think that the New Testament stories about money changers in the temple and those sorts of references created that kind of moral reprehension? And I know I have a suspicion your next slide is going to be about how Jewish people became merchants because they weren't allowed to enter any other kind of profession and they weren't allowed to own land. So one thing sort of flows into the other, but I'm wondering what the linkage is between what was ingrained in European Christians by the Christian church and these attitudes.
Good question. Really good question. I would argue that the hostility towards money changers and tax collectors and people like that mentioned in the New Testament is an expression of this attitude that pre-existed it. I think if you went to pre-Roman Gaul which had a class of big men, even if it didn't really have organized states. It had a class of big men aristocrats, and it had a class of little men, mostly independent but poor farmers under them. You would find that those villages of Gauls held their merchant class in much the same kind of suspicion and dislike as expressed in the New Testament as we find in medieval Christian Europe. It's true that Christianity promotes these ideas. Many religions do. There's quite a bit in the Talmud that is very negative about tax collectors, and a number of critical things about money lending and even about trade. So it's not exclusive to Christianity, and I think it's more a product of this social tension. People who are used to their economic interactions are, I'm dealing with my neighbor who I know and we're both trying to find a fair deal, versus I'm dealing with a stranger, someone who's a social outcast of the community, someone who has this negative social capital, who is just trying to make the most possible money they can. And that feels very unneighborly, and it feels greedy, it feels miserly. You know, that profit motive that we take for granted today was much more distrusted back then. And one example of that I have right here is this woodcut by Hans Holbein the Younger, a fairly well-known artist from the early modern period when these attitudes are still quite dominant. The rich man. We have this rich man, we have this merchant. He's not explicitly stated to be Jewish. Indeed, he may not be, but he's clearly a merchant. He's clearly involved in trade. He's clearly accumulated a great deal of money. And here comes death, pointing out that in the end, death will take your money from you. And these sorts of attitudes, negative attitudes towards not wealthy nobles, not wealthy aristocrats or big men, but wealthy merchants, are near universal in China, in India, in the Islamic Middle East, in Christian Europe. They take different forms in different places, but you find them everywhere. I see another hand. If it's short enough, I can just repeat your comment. But
say that Jews were not allowed to own land,
mm-hmm.
but in this period, no one could own land, right, except the feudal lords. So is it more accurate to say then that Jews were not allowed to be serfs or to be little men in this system?
Yes. In most cases, not all cases, Jews are not allowed to be little men in this system. You do have non-aristocrats owning land, but most of the land is owned by aristocrats. You're right. So banning Jews from owning land means relatively little in a society where your average Christian also doesn't own any land. It's probably a serf or a peasant. Or they had a little sort of a runaround to make this work in the Islamic world, where technically serfdom was banned, but they found ways to do essentially the same thing. Or a Chinese peasant who's a renter. And the thing is, we see Jews getting involved in trade as merchants, not just in Christian Europe, where we're banned from owning land and being moneylenders is one of the few jobs we're permitted to have. We also see Jews getting really involved in trade in the Islamic Middle East, where we were allowed to own land. And you also have Muslims lending money at interest and being permitted to do things like that. So clearly, there's something bigger here than just simple, the Jews weren't allowed to be farmers, so they became moneylenders. And that brings us really to our next slide. Middleman minorities. Merchants in feudalism are social outcasts. By definition, they're social outcasts. They may get rich and have enough money to sort of buy their way into a very important place in society, and they certainly serve a very important commercial role. But they're outcasts because they don't have these horizontal social ties with the little men or with the big men. And so other types of outcasts get pushed into handling commerce and trade and banking. Sometimes that push is explicit in Christian Europe. Jews aren't allowed to own land. They're banned from many professions, with the exceptions usually being things like money lending and buying and selling used clothing. But often it's not explicitly spelled out. It just sort of happens. Because we're excluded from the rest of society. So Gaining entry into other types of professions is very difficult, if not impossible. It's hard to succeed in those professions, even if you get into them. And so ethnic and religious minorities come to act as these merchant middlemen, handling trade between big men and little men, between one region and another. They're almost always hated for it. Yes, we've got Jonathan Lightman, because this brings us back to something you said much earlier.
So what I'm curious, because I don't see it on the slide, is the thing that would come to mind is this. It's not just that, let's say that there is a kind of a push factor that you're, you can't be in all this, you're pushed out, but that there would also be a pull factor. And from what I don't see on the slide is literacy. That, in other words, you have, no matter whether you're a Jew in the Muslim world or you're a Jew in the Christian world, you have an ethic, an emphasis on education that doesn't exist in other societies that would then perhaps make you more successful in a field that would require computational skills, require negotiation skills, and perhaps familiarity with other languages or such. And I would just be curious as to the emphasis that you would believe that literacy has on this. So
I think it's a chicken and the egg question. And it gets into this trade diaspora point that I was about to make. I think what happens is you've got these ethnic groups, these minorities, ethnic and religious minorities, being pushed into this role of being middlemen and merchants, because these are the jobs no one else wants to do. They're lucrative, so you can use that money to help deal with the bigotry and discrimination and violence you face from the rest of society, and which makes it, a desirable way of dealing with that. And of course, Jews are entirely capable of forming our own parallel set of horizontal social ties. We're excluded from the social ties of the little men and the big men, but we form our own really strong ones, because the rest of society is against us. They discriminate against us, they're bigoted against us, they're often actively violent against us. And the Jewish response, which is also comes to be the Armenian response and the Parsi response in India, and the response of a lot of these other groups, is to close ranks around each other. If you meet a Jew from another city or from another place, there's an instant connection. And you're much more likely to make business deals and do things with that Jew from another place because, well, this is the era before modern banking systems or before modern financial institutions. If I want to do long-distance trade, if I want to do business between Germany and Italy, there really isn't much to help me if the guy I'm doing business with on the other end just decides to rip me off and take my stuff and cheat me. I can appeal to the prince of his city, and how likely is the prince of his city to intervene on behalf of a foreigner, to take action against probably a wealthy merchant in his own community. But if I'm a Jew from Frankfurt, and I'm doing business with a Jew in the Jewish community in Venice, well, we've got horizontal social ties connecting us. And if the Jew in Venice decides to rip me off, I can call on horizontal social ties to the rest of the Jewish community in Venice to bring a whole lot of pressure to bear on that person, to be fair with me, and to pay me what he owes me. And because if you screw over the community, if you get kicked out by the community and you're Jewish in Christian medieval Europe, you're quite out of luck, to avoid using any profanity here. If you're excluded from the Jewish community because you weren't playing fair, you've got that negative social capital, then that's a real problem for you. And so to acquire social capital, Jews deal very fairly with each other, sometimes more fairly than we're dealing with the non-Jewish communities that we're selling things to. And of course, part of this building this trade diaspora based on that strong tribal identity that you talked about earlier, the one we're forming because we're being excluded from everyone else's social ties, involves things like promoting literacy and education, because we need those things to succeed. I do think Jews tend to emphasize literacy and education more so than most other groups in world history. you do see similar emphases, maybe not to the same degree, but there is still an emphasis on literacy in Parsi society, for instance. And it's important to, you know, have basic numeracy, to be able to do basic math if you're an Armenian. Well, Jews are the prime example of a middleman minority because we're more spread out than anyone else, because we were facing discrimination well before the medieval period, and that made us more susceptible to this. It happens to other groups too. The Armenians, who are a Christian diaspora spread out across the Middle East with their own language and their own customs and their own insular community, under Muslim rule, they come to act as a middleman minority alongside the Middle Eastern Jewish community. The Parsis, who are Zoroastrians who fled the Muslim conquest for India, become a middleman minority in parts of Western India. And then we see this with groups who aren't middleman minorities in their homeland, but act as one elsewhere. Arabs in the Middle East aren't a middleman minority. Arabs in Indochina, in what becomes Indonesia, in China, southern China, act as a middleman minority. And naturally, these groups face violence and discrimination. There's a major anti-Arab pogrom in Canton in southern China that happens in the late Middle Ages. That's a result of local Chinese people being angry at these greedy foreigners who are making all kinds of money and getting rich. We see this with Guwaratis. Gujarat is a region in India. Outside of that region, in other parts of India, Guwaratis form a middleman minority. And I could keep going. Did you have a comment, Tamar? Hold on one second.
I was just gonna say, isn't that how Indonesia became Muslim?
Yes.
Like for the traders?
Well, yes. Arab traders prefer to do business in states that follow Islamic law about trade and commerce, and so princes convert to Islam to draw more merchants and trade and make themselves wealthier, and they promote that among their people. But even after that's happened, and Indonesia becomes increasingly Muslim, Arabs specifically, not Muslims, but Arabs still form a middleman minority in the region. And later you also have a Chinese trade diaspora in Indonesia and the Philippines, and that's where we get Singapore from as well. All right, any questions? Is this making sense? Are we following along? Okay, good, because just want to make sure I am making sense. I just wanted to show you a couple of examples. I mean, the world is full of examples, of course, of violence and discrimination against middleman minorities, specifically the Jews. This is a depiction referencing the wave of anti-Jewish, defending the wave of anti-Jewish violence that hit the Jews of Norwich, England in the Middle Ages, in which a number of Jews were killed. You'll note the devils, or the devil there indicating the noses of the Jewish man and woman. You'll note also the scales loaded down with coins, the association between Jews and trade and business that was going on even then. You'll also note the Christian God at the top right there with three faces for the Trinity. But of course, we're not the only group that experiences this. This is from the 1740s, after the Middle Ages, but you're still seeing similar phenomenon when Chinese merchants form a trade diaspora throughout the Philippines and Indonesia. And there are major anti-Chinese pogroms that happen in Manila and in Batavia, in Java, and also in Jakarta and other places there, where there's this group of merchants. They're a different ethnicity. They practice a different religion. They're seen as foreign, seen as outsiders, seen as profiting off the community, but not contributing to it. I should note, this isn't true, right? Merchants, whether they're middleman minorities or not, are contributing tremendously to local and national economies everywhere they exist. And this violence, and historians have demonstrated this repeatedly, when you have these outbreaks of violence targeted at middleman minorities and at merchants generally, the result is the economy suffers. And the local economy gets bad. They kick the Jews out, and then they invite them in a few years later because the local economy starts cratering. because they don't have access to potentially cheaper imported goods, to specialist goods they can't make themselves. They aren't able to export the things they need to export. But there's this cultural attitude, a result of those horizontal social ties, and this group of people who aren't part of those social ties that leads to them being hated and feared and distrusted. Yeah, Tamar. This is Batavia, not Jakarta. See, Batavia in Java. They may have changed. I'm sure they've changed the name now, but I don't believe I think Batavia and Jakarta are different cities. This is certainly this is quite old, so the city may look rather different now. All right. But of course, other than just being merchants and trade, there are other roles involving money that Jews are known for holding. One of those is as tax collectors. So I asked a question on the advertisement for this talk, and that question was, why would Poland, a country notorious for its anti-Semitism, why would the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth appoint Jews to be its tax collectors? Like disproportionately, Jews were tax collectors in medieval Poland. If they don't like us, they don't trust us, why would they do this? Yeah, Devorah. Because nobody else wanted that role. It's certainly looked down on. People don't like tax collectors in the pre-modern world, yeah?
Their money, and they're very good. They're very good with money. And from my experience, I know my brother is also not tax collector, but he's very good of financial dealing with money.
Sure.
So he told me that the Jewish have a good plan, and they're very smart. I mean, I can say they're very educated about money. So they've been all their life not to budget.
So one aspect is definitely these people know how to read, they know how to do math, they're familiar with money and how to handle it, which in an economy which is primarily non-monetary is a relatively rare thing. Finding people who know how to do this stuff can be a challenge, and Jews and other middleman minorities do. Yeah?
They were honest, they would always bring back the money.
They were honest, they would always bring back the money. So unfortunately, I don't think Jews were any more or less honest as tax collectors than anyone else. Perhaps a bit more honest in the sense that the kings, the governments that are employing them as tax collectors can be violent a lot more freely towards Jews than they can other people. So you want to keep your employer happy, which kind of draws us into the fact that tax collecting looked very different in the pre-modern world than it does now. We think of tax collectors like the IRS, government officials working for the state, paid a fixed salary to go out and collect taxes, however much they collect, and then turn those taxes over to the government. But that's not how it worked in most of these places. Under feudalism, your most common tax collector is in fact a tax farmer, and they're a private interest. Their side job may be being a merchant as well as being a tax collector. They may be doing something else. And what the government will do is they will say, I want to collect, let's say, 100 pounds from this district right here. Is there anyone willing to pay me 100 pounds for the right to be the tax collector in this district? And someone will show up, someone who's wealthy and has money, and will say, all right, I will pay you 100 pounds for the right to be the tax collector in this district. And the government will say, cool, go collect taxes from this district. If you collect less than 100 pounds, sucks to be you. You've already paid us, we've already gotten the money we want for this district, we don't care. But if you collect more than 100 pounds, if you collect 120 pounds, or 150 pounds, or 200 pounds in taxes, you get to keep it. You get to keep the profit. This makes sense? And So what happens is you get these tax farmers, these tax collectors who they have a financial incentive to collect as much taxes as they possibly can in the area they're responsible for. Because the more taxes they collect, the more profit they make, the more on top of whatever fee they're paying the government for the right to be a tax collector, the more they're able to take home. And this is why tax collectors are so unpopular in the Talmud. And also in the New Testament, because the Roman tax collectors were extremely dishonest, and their job was not to collect a fixed tax for the government. Their job was to collect as much as they possibly could in taxes so they could make money and get rich off of this deal, which is why the Talmud equates them with thieves. And the reality is, Jewish tax farmers in Poland and Jewish and Armenian tax farmers in the Ottoman Empire are not any substantially more honest with taxes than anyone else. What they are is easier to control. Consider, you are the king of Poland. There is a large Polish nobility. Poland had one of the largest nobilities in Europe, and a good chunk of that nobility can read and write. So if you're the king of Poland, you have the opportunity to hire these guys as your tax collectors, your fellow Christian Polish nobles. But the problem is, these big men, you're a big man, obviously, you're the biggest man in the country. These other big men, they're rivals, right? If you hire them as tax collectors, this is a very lucrative job. You can make a tremendous amount of money working as a tax collector, and that doesn't just make you more powerful, it makes your family, right? And more powerful, and any other big men who have horizontal social ties with you are also going to be more important as well. And big men want social ties with the richest and most powerful of the big men. And so hiring fellow Catholics in Poland or fellow Muslims in the Ottoman Empire risks empowering your rivals within the system. And that's dangerous to you. But if you're hiring Jews to be tax collectors, to do this job with all this negative social capital associated with it, well, people hate the Jews. You can, if you've got a problem with these tax collectors, you can have them arrested, you can have them expelled and take their stuff. And people won't, the peasants, the little men won't blame you for the hated taxes. They'll blame the tax farmers who are collecting so much more than the minimum they could be collecting for the district, who are trying to squeeze as much money as possible out of the local people there. And you can blame the Jews for high taxes, that you're the one who is levying by extension. We got a couple of hands.
The king sets the tax rate, right? Like the Jews aren't, okay, so it's just a matter of like collecting from everyone who actually owes taxes.
So on the one hand, the Jews are not the ones setting the tax rate. The king of Poland is saying, I forget what medieval currency looked like in Poland. It's measures of silver, essentially, is what they're calculating this in. He says, I expect to collect, 45 talers of silver from this particular district in Poland. You, tax farmer, I expect you to pay me 45 talers of silver in taxes you've collected from this district. If you collect 90 talers, you get to keep the other 45. And if you collect 100 talers, you get to keep the other 55. And so while the kings are setting taxes, and the kings can raise taxes, of course, they can say it was 45 last year, it's 90 this year. The tax collectors are, in a sense, setting their own higher taxes because they're getting rich on this deal. They're going to charge the highest taxes they possibly can, backed, of course, by the king's soldiers, because they're trying to make money. I think, did you have a hand? No. Okay, I think then we've got one over here.
Why should I give you any more than I have to?
Because if you don't, I will go to the local garrison. I will go and I will say, hey, I'm the king's tax collector. I came to collect taxes from this farm. The guy refused to pay the king's taxes, and a group of soldiers will show up to back you up to force this person to pay you taxes.
Pieces of silver instead of the 25 that you want, But all I owe you is 20.
Exactly. Yep. I only want to pay you 20 because all I owe you is 20, but you're trying to collect 25 or 30 or 40. Doesn't matter. The king doesn't care if the tax farmers collect extra on top of his taxes as long as his minimum taxes get paid. And if some guy is refusing to pay the extra, well, that could lead to him saying, why do I have to pay taxes at all? Which means the state is going to back up the tax farmers if they get challenged by peasants. Of course, if the tax farmers go too far, the peasants may rebel. They may kill the tax collector. There is a limit to how far you can push this, but they will try and push this as far as they absolutely can. And you can understand how this is going to lead to a lot of anti-Semitic tropes and a great deal of hatred of Jews, because Jewish tax farmers are acting the same way as non-Jewish tax farmers. They are charging more. They may not be charging as much as a non-Jewish tax farmer, because since they're already subject to violence and discrimination, they may not want to risk charging as high as a Christian tax collector is. But they are definitely collecting more taxes than the king has actually asked for, because they're trying to make money on this. And they will do it in a way that benefits them. Because of course they're not going to collect taxes on their friends and relations and business partners in the same way they're going to collect taxes on everyone else. And this is going to lead to a great deal of anger and hostility. Yes? I mean, the peasants may not know, but wealthier people certainly will. You are to a degree collecting taxes from big men, although mostly you're collecting them from peasants. Even if the peasant doesn't know exactly what the official tax is that the king is asking for, they know that the tax collector is trying to collect as much as possible. They know that the collector, the tax collector, the tax farmer is trying to maximize the money that they can make. And so countries like Poland, like the Ottoman Empire, we know Jews were tax collectors in France, in many parts of Germany. We know Jews were tax collectors in parts of England. Certainly in the Middle East, in Egypt, Jews often worked as tax collectors because it was convenient for the ruling powers to have this hated minority that is literate, knows how to do math, knows how to handle money when most people don't know how to handle money, and isn't a threat to their power. It's convenient to employ these people as tax farmers. Yes?
For clarification, I'd suggest that taxes were not like they are with the IRS, where you read the rules and you multiply by a percentage. It was an ad hoc thing, so an individual peasant couldn't say, wait a minute, I only owe 20, you're collecting 25. The fact is that the tax collector would be someone who would know what's going on with that particular guy and say, I think this person can afford 25, and they would demand 25, and the peasant would have no argument other than, I don't really have it.
Yeah, exactly. You're exactly. This isn't like there's a specific set of rules to calculate how much each person owes. This is the tax collector shows up and tells the peasant, who can't read or write and knows only the most basic ability to count, says, your farm looks wealthy enough that you can afford to pay 25 in taxes. And peasants will lie, and they'll try and pretend they can't. And there are various tax dodges people will use to try and get around this, but it's very much the tax collector shows up and tells you how much you have to pay, and you have no recourse if you feel like they're charging you unfairly. Anyway, but it's not just tax collectors. In a sec. It's not just tax collectors. You're also going to have, especially in Europe, you're going to have European courts hiring what are called court Jews. You guys ever heard of the concept of the court Jew? Yeah, like Joseph is sort of the prototypical court Jew for Pharaoh. We see this as well in the Middle Ages. You also see this to a degree in the Middle East, grand viziers being Jewish or even Christian. This is a powerful and important position. Not only is this person loaning large amounts of money to the king, but they're also fulfilling a role very similar to like a minister of finance or a secretary of commerce in today's system. They are acting as a powerful minister to the king, advising him on matters of policy and often setting their own matters of policy. Why do these anti-Semitic monarchs, why are they appointing Jews to this powerful and important position? Why not a member of their nobility? Well, same reason as we talked about before. When Aaron of Lincoln, who was one of the earliest court Jews that we have, like, historically attested records for in Europe, he's a court Jew to the Norman kings of England. And he loans large amounts of money to the king, and he sets economic policy, and he manages all sorts of things, and his agents get attacked by anti-Semitic mobs. And when he dies, the king, who was Henry II at that point in time, Henry II says, this man was a usurer. His property is now all the king's property, and just seizes his estate, including the canceling the debts that the king owed to the guy. And this is something that is much easier to do if the fellow who's essentially your minister of finance is Jewish than if he's a Christian noble who has powerful family connections and important horizontal social ties with other big men who may get angry on the behalf of his heirs if you try and just seize his stuff. Court Jews can gain great wealth and status. We've all heard of Mayer Rothschild. They can also end up getting killed, like poor Joseph Oppenheimer, who is in that gibbet, or rather his body is in that gibbet, the cage hanging there as a warning to others outside of Württemberg. And he was a powerful and important court Jew. The Duke, who he was court Jew to, died. And the result was he no longer had a protector. The community turned on him. He gets sentenced to death. He isn't convicted of any crime. People just don't like him. He's a wealthy and important Jew. Yes.
Being obedient and waiting for the microphone.
Thank you.
Yeah, my recollection is that Jews were expelled from England, for example, in the 13th century.
Yes.
And from other parts of Western Europe, and which is why the Jewish communities in Eastern Europe became so large. How did that affect the existence of Jews in European courts when the majority of Jews were expelled?
Good question. First, I'll point out Henry II is almost 200 years before the expulsion of the Jews in 1290 from England, in which what king expelled us in 1290? It was an Edward, one of the Edwards, expels us from England in 1290. He's doing it in part because there's a lot of unhappy people about taxes, and he chooses to blame the Jews. He's scapegoating us. He does it in part because he gets to seize Jewish property. Most of the economic crimes he accuses the Jews of are like either completely made up or are things that everyone was doing, like coin clipping. He accused the Jews of shaving little bits off coins, and then you spend the coin for its full value, and then you can, sell what you've clipped off. But like literally everyone was doing this. So he was scapegoating us and trying to make his population happy. We have records of times when court Jews were permitted to reside in cities where it was illegal to be Jewish, but they made an exception for the court Jew and his family. You see this a lot in Germany, where you have these small German principalities that have officially expelled the Jews, but oh dang, that crashed our economy. We need to bring this really wealthy Jew in who can help us order the economy and can loan money to the prince. And so he issues some kind of edict of tolerance that applies to the court Jew and his family and immediate associates. So often they are making exceptions just for these people. Which sometimes leads to, sometimes court Jews were protectors of the general Jewish community and could act to help the rest of the community. And sometimes they were seen as like they betrayed the Jewish community by getting in bed with these Christian monarchs and benefiting monetarily. And what are you doing at the court of this prince who is actively, murdering members of the Jewish community and kicking us out, but he's not doing it to you? Yeah.
I had to point out there, we have 10 minutes left, so maybe hold the questions.
Yeah,
so
let's
that
hold the questions
until
and keep going. but I'm glad people are interested. I just wanted to briefly show you a picture. This is from the Netherlands. There's a Jewish tax collector. There's a group of peasants who are paying. There's a chicken there. There's an egg. They're paying in farm produce to pay their taxes, and you can tell that the tax collector is not depicted very very positively. Oop, hang on. Right, modern nationalism. This is where we end things off. Because of course, feudalism doesn't last forever. The economy changes. We have the rise of capitalism, the rise of modern financial institutions. Suddenly, having a trade diaspora isn't as important as it once was. Suddenly, those horizontal and vertical social ties that define feudalism are being broken up in the community. Nations become a lot more hostile towards these middleman minorities, especially the Jews, but including other groups as well. Formerly, it wasn't, there was hostility, there was violence, but this broad idea of we are one nation and there's a group of dangerous foreigners living in our midst wasn't so universal, and it wasn't seen as so urgent. With nationalism, especially with biological racism in the 1800s, the idea that there are these dangerous foreigners who have lived among us for hundreds of years, have never assimilated, will never assimilate, are actively sabotaging our economy on their own behalf, sending money overseas, they may even work with our enemies. This is seen as very dangerous and something that has to be dealt with. And the result is a new wave of bigotry and violence. And we see this in Europe. It starts in the early 1800s with the Hep riots in Germany, which aren't just in one German principality, because Germany's not united yet, but take place across Germany as an expression of early German nationalism. They take place in North America in the late 19th, early 20th century, where you have things like the lynching of Leo Frank in Georgia. They take place in the Middle East, especially in the 20th century, with the rise of Arab nationalism. You start seeing growing anti-Jewish violence, which predates, I will note, the founding of Israel. All right? Sometimes people will attempt to say, well, this wave of, yes, the founding of Israel leads to sort of a renewed wave of anti-Jewish violence, but there was a massive pogrom in Baghdad in the 1940s. Anti-Jewish violence in Iran and Egypt long predates Israel being even on anyone's radar, and is directly connected to the rise of Arab and Iranian and Muslim nationalism. You see it in India. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of a fellow by the name of Subhas Chandra Bose. He was a major figure in Indian nationalism. He was an associate of Gandhi's in the Indian National Congress. He splits with Gandhi, and he throws in with Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan in World War II. One of the things he says in his writings when he's still in India, before he does that, is he says, you cannot be an Indian nationalist if you are not also an anti-Semite. He claims the Jews control the British Empire and they're behind the economic exploitation of India, and that the Jews need to be, calls for the expulsion essentially of the Jews from India. And of course you see this with other middleman minorities as well. This picture right here, this could be Babi Yar in Poland where Jews were massacred. It's not. This is from a wave of anti-Armenian violence in the 1890s that killed a couple 100,000 Armenians before the Armenian genocide of 20 years later. Because the Armenians were also a middleman minority. They were also tax collectors in the Ottoman Empire. And when the Young Turks take power in Turkey, these modern nationalists, they say, we need a strong Turkey. And that means we need a nationally pure Turkey, where we deal with these foreign threats within our country who, especially these Christian Armenians, who are weakening us and in league with Russia and France and the Christian powers of Europe and working against Turkey. And the result is mass anti-Armenian violence. So I want to because we're almost out of time, and then I will take any questions for anyone who wants to stay after. I just wanted to show you guys a couple of pictures. This is a drawing presenting the Hep riots in Germany in the 1810s, which targeted Jews across Germany. And were a response in part to the emancipation of Jews in Germany and Jews gaining more rights after the Napoleonic Wars. In conclusion, the connection between Jews and money is a product of our outsider status and the economic state of feudalism, in which outsiders get pushed into being merchants and get pushed into these jobs, these money-related jobs that either no one wants or the people in power don't trust the general population to hold. And this role that we hold in commerce and in tax collection, this is the basis for many anti-Semitic stereotypes. All right. I will take questions. I will take comments and observations, maybe for the next 15 minutes or so, or perhaps till 11:45. Oh, sorry, announcements and then questions. Yes, the next lecture, I'll be giving another one on July 27th. It is going to be about Jewish women. Sarah's putting this one together. I'm going to be delivering it, though she will be available to answer questions if I can't answer them. July 27th at 10 o'clock, again, on a Sunday. It's called Cycles. And it is about Jewish women in the ancient world well, their experiences with the society that they live in.
Yeah. Now, if any of you are not on the mailing list, you didn't get the flyer about this lecture, please sign up. I'll have the sign up over there. Put your email, phone number.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Don't look at me.
Yeah.
I mean, I have no problem with that. This is this is free. You are welcome yeah.
It will be it will be, we'll put it on, I think, a YouTube, we have a YouTube. We're just starting that. So well, it will. Yeah, it will be recorded. You have the email, you can email, you have the email for Talia at KOH. So email her.
Thank you. All right. I will take questions from anyone who would like to. I believe Devorah had a question. Can you pass that? Can you just give that to Devorah so we don't have, Dwight doesn't have to come from the other side of the room?
Okay, I'm sort of missing one little step here. What happened that the world left feudalism and went into nationalism?
Well, that's a big question. And that is, why does the world leave behind feudalism, and where does capitalism come from, and how does it get started, and what causes the rise of nationalism as an ideology? And this is something books have been written about, and I could recommend a couple of books. The Great Divergence, if you want to learn about the change in the economy from feudalism to capitalism. Imagined Communities by Benedict Anderson, if you want a book about what nationalism, where it comes from. The Cliff Notes version is that at the end of the Middle Ages, feudalism breaks down. It required always a certain amount of violence on the part of the big men to keep the little men down. The little men, their labor becomes much more valuable. The economy becomes much more monetized. They're able to insist on greater rights and freedoms. As the system crumbles, towns and cities grow. People start engaging with the market much more. And as literacy increases and people in different places are reading the same books, you have this idea that I am part of the same community as the other people who are reading the same books and newspapers I am. And this idea that language groups, all the French people, all the Germans, all the Italians, each group is a nation, kind of starts to emerge. There's so much more to it than just that, though.
Well, thank you for the Cliff Notes version.
I'd love to give a talk, by the way, on that subject.
So-
maybe a future time. Yeah, tomorrow.
So there's like not enough slots for like court Jews or tax collectors for like all the Jewish population. So where the rest were like, so like yeah, because like when Rashi was making wine, he didn't own the vineyards. He just collected it from the different vineyards and then made it. Like I'm
so,
thinking of
obviously, not everyone's a court Jew or a tax collector. And keep in mind, when we say merchants, your average merchant at this time is not rich. Your average merchant is a peddler. He has a cart, he has a donkey. He goes from town to town, from village to village. There's probably some local town that's a trade hub where he's based and actually lives. He buys things in that town that people in the villages can't get, takes stuff from there to towns in his cart, to villages, sells things in the villages, buying like different types of agricultural produce and stuff, maybe pickled vegetables, things that'll keep, takes that stuff back to the town to sell it. Picks up more things, comes back, does business there. He isn't rich or making a tremendous amount of money, and he supports an extended family.
Going from place to place and to be in between. And so, when we're talking about, you have a merchant in Frankfurt and you have a merchant in Venice. Well, you have a bunch of people in between there making it so that can happen.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of people involved, all of which would be part of the Jewish community.
like when they come with all these like in the Geniza, or they have like where they were like communicating with places far away. Instead of passing one person has to do that, person has to do that. Like when like they were Jews in like different places were.
There's definitely long distance communication between Jewish communities, much more so than other communities, because we have this trade diaspora. Communicating between cities is not just, friendly and neighbor-like, it's lucrative. It's part of how you maintain those horizontal social ties between Jewish communities that make long distance trade possible for Jews in a way it isn't possible for Christians and Muslims in the general population. Anyone else? We have a couple of hands over here. Yes. You'll be next.
Okay. It's interesting, feudalism, I guess, disappeared many centuries ago. I'm not sure how many, but like what, 7, 8, I don't know. Many centuries, right? And yet the stereotype of the Jew and money still persists. And so I'm wondering, is that because we still have some values still rooted in feudalism, or is it for other reasons?
Well, let's see. First, feudalism didn't end that long ago. The Enlightenment, the Renaissance, which is thought of as sort of the end of feudalism in the Middle Ages, that begins in the 14th and 15th centuries. And so we're talking 5 or 6, maybe 700 years ago on the outside, but that's not universal, right? Feudalism.
That's not when it really changes like the lives of actual people in Europe, right? You've got those big ideas going around in certain cities in Italy in the 13 and 1400s, but that doesn't mean your average peasant's life actually changed, and really doesn't until more people start to move to cities because of industry.
I want you to say that.
One sec. I want to. There's more to say to his question. Feudalism doesn't end in Russia until the late 1800s.
That was my comment.
Yeah, exactly. And feudalism also lasts even longer in other parts of the world, in parts of the Middle East and Asia. In China, you still have Chinese peasants living as renters on land controlled by a class of big men landlords into the 20th century. And that doesn't really end until the Chinese Revolution. And how much it even ended from that is questionable in some places. And so it's still quite recent. That's one explanation. Another explanation is it's cultural, right? These cultural ideas about Jews, about money, about who we are and the role we play, these anti-Semitic hatreds, they survive, they take on other other
they get incorporated into nationalism,
Yes.
right? These language and cultural ideas that become nationalism also exclude the other, and in some ways exclude them more.
Yes, people aren't hating Jews because they're the merchants who aren't part of the system of horizontal social ties that the peasants have in this community. They're hating Jews now because we are Germans. This is Germany, and there's this group of people in Germany who refuse to truly be German and assimilate, and are screwed us over in World War I. The reasons change. The hatred just adapts. Next, please. And then Janice afterwards.
No, your comment about feudalism persisting in Russia till the early 20th century. I mean, it was clear that under the czars and until they were overthrown, Russia was a feudal country.
Yeah. They get rid of the legal elements of feudalism in the latter half the 1800s, latter half of the 19th century. But a lot of its structures survive. You still have your Jewish peddlers traveling around parts of Russia and selling things still in that role into the 20th century. Yes.
Thank you so much. This is fascinating, and you were both amazing teachers.
Thank you.
Really amazing. I always learn from both of you. Kind of wheeling things back to a conversation a few minutes ago about, well, not everybody, like Tamara said, not everybody was the court Jew or the tax collector. What about the regular people? There's a book I want to point out that Marissa Rubin loaned me called The Memoirs of Gluckel of Hamelin. And if anyone has ever read that, it really, do we have it here? Oh, it's it's such a beautiful read because it's the memoir of this woman in the 1500s or something who was Jewish. She had a family with, I don't know, like 15 kids. And it talked about how did she change money, and how did she sell jewelry, and how did she, arrange marriages. And then the family was all part of commerce. And how did they have money? And then how did they get destroyed? And how did they deal with the clergy and the noble people? And they were just trying to survive. And they were so religious. Their Judaism was so, they were so proud. So I would highly recommend. Yeah, I would highly recommend this book. It's a beautiful read. Thank you.
I will hang around if anyone has any other questions they'd like to ask me, but I'm gonna turn off my microphone, and maybe we can get snacks if you're interested in. Oh, is there anyone with questions on Zoom? Nope, no questions on Zoom. Alrighty then, but like I said, I'll hang around if anyone has any other questions for me, and thank you so much for coming, and I hope you enjoyed yourselves.
Let's thank Nate for a great talk. Looking forward to the next one in the series. And I was reminded by Jonathan that the date for the Rabbi Walpe talk is October 29th. It's a Wednesday evening, so mark your calendars. It'll be in the Grand Ballroom, yes.